Welcome to the Macross Delta Recap Show, Episode 11. This is EXO with the magical girl that quit jellyfish before she could even get started, Celia Rose,
Hello.
and the mecha expert that could fill the hole that Messer left, Chad.
Hi, everybody.
All right, so Episode 11, very sad. I mean, I need to call my therapist for this one. And then it got even sadder when I read the subs. That ending scene with Kaname, where she's just like, "Freya's not your only rival. I'm gonna sing my heart out," and then she just did. That was incredible. That's the word.
I thought it was actually pretty good. I like that we do get some answers to Messer. I know there were quite a few fans online, at least, that were speculating that Messer may not actually be dead. Sorry, guys, he's dead. But I like the way that they handled it and the reality that Delta really needed Messer's strengths and what they're going to do about it, and also what's changing for Windamir's plans. So far, they've been foiled in each episode, where Delta has come up with a solution to hinder their plans in some way. And now they're finally acting on something different to make sure that they do succeed. Overall, I thought it was really good. I say that about every episode, and it's starting to sound a little repetitive, but I enjoyed it.
I did call it last show of ours that it was going to start off with a funeral. I was thinking, if they do that, they're not going to show how they got out of that mess, because without Messer, they're really getting creamed by the aerial knights. And they don't really answer that question in this episode. I'm assuming that they got support just to get out of that mess. Another thing that I was asking about is how the hell did they recover the Valkyrie in such great shape? It was just riddled with holes, but structurally it was still pretty much together.
No, I don't know. Maybe it could have been recovered, before it crash landed or something. You don't know for sure. But
They do have an autopilot in
yes,
those
yeah.
Valkyries. Yeah, I guess there's stuff that we could just like figure out for ourselves.
I
It
don't
could
think
have
it's any
been.
it's any more of a mystery than a lot of the other dropped plot threads or things
I
like that
know, but
anime
it's
is known
still
for. So
Well, and it could have even be something as simple as once Keith got his target, he was done. Like, I'm done engaging. We activated the protoculture ruins. Goodbye.
yeah,
You know,
mission complete.
well, they actually blew their mission because Heinz was supposed to sing, right? And then from that chart that we are looking at, it was supposed to do this massive thing across the galaxy, but the Walkure messed it up. So I guess the mission failed and they had to go back, maybe?
They're also like outnumbered too, like these missions and stuff like that the Windamirans have been conducting on Al Shahal and most of the other worlds that they haven't yet conquered. It's just like there's always only a small group of aerial knights attacking, right? And then there's like a much larger like nuns force and also the chaos force as well who are opposing them. So I think like most of the time it's like the longer something goes on, the more and more assets are brought to bear against whoever is causing trouble. And so even as good as the aerial knights are, even they have limits and they're going to be outnumbered and just overwhelmed the longer sort of these operations go on. So it's in their best interest to go in, do their thing, and get out.
All right, well, one last question. Who cleaned the cockpit before they opened it up? No, I'm just kidding. I mean, they couldn't show that. They couldn't show that on TV. I don't know about, Japanese TV, but that's too graphic for US TV. They would have never shown all that blood. That was a pretty good shot by Keith, straight to the heart.
Yeah, they even make a comment in that scene where the repair crews and the Delta squadrons are examining Messer's former VF-31 Siegfried variable fighter, and someone says that was like an inhuman level of accuracy, or like no normal pilot could have achieved that or done that. It was an impossible shot or something like that. I can't remember specifically what the subs had it
mhm.
as, but it was supposed to be something quite exceptional.
Do you guys think some people like got super happy when Mirage came to Hayate and said Lieutenant Messer's back?
I think that was, yeah, a little bit of a troll, for
Fake
sure.
out.
Yeah, it's just like a minor fake out that got maybe a few hopefuls, yeah, hoping against hope that Messer was somehow still alive.
Right after the opening, we see Freya inside this big tube where they're scanning her, trying to find out what happened to her. Mikumo enters, and they pretty much discuss what happened between them and the Windsinger.
What I thought was important about that scene with the other members of Valkyrie was when Kaname mentions that there were abnormal fold values, and she did point those out before they were sucked into that dimensional space about, I think it was 2 episodes ago, maybe, and saying that they appeared when both Heinz and Mikumo and Freya were resonating with the ruins at the same same time, but they're still not 100% sure what the cause of that was. It could be that the abnormal waves come from, Heinz and the multiple protoculture ruins. It could be that they're coming from the amplifiers that Mr. Belger and the Epsilon Foundation installed on the protoculture ruins in Windamir that's causing it, but whatever it was is responsible for sucking them into that dimensional space. And no matter how many times they run vital tests on them, they still can't find out what's wrong with Freya and Mikumo physically. So it's not something that is caused by them at the very least. So they're trying to narrow down what exactly is causing this to happen.
And I remember Celia mentioning that she looks good in the hospital gown also.
I did. I did. I
Nakumo
did.
looks
I
good in
tweeted that.
everything.
She does. I
She
tweeted. I
does.
tweeted that on
Like,
Sunday.
it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
She
Well,
makes
she
even
looks
a
good in
hospital gown look
everything.
stylish.
Or yeah.
Because if you guys have been in a hospital gown, you know it's not the prettiest thing in the world.
Oh, it's very
Everybody
unflattering.
hates it.
Yeah. And somehow she of course makes it look amazing.
Yeah, they had something in her cut.
Well, the sequence did have like a brief moment between Kaname and Ard as well. They have a little bit of talk about what's actually happening, and then they talk about how it looks like they were able to contact the Wind Singer in some fashion through the protoculture ruins. And then they have like a small moment where Ard says to Kaname, if you want to take some time off, over, because of what happened with Messer and stuff like that, you can certainly feel free to do that. And Kaname says, no, I'm fine. And then she turns it around on him and asks him, like, how are you doing and stuff. And he says, oh, I'll cope. And it was like a nice little moment that lets you know that there's still like this relationship there that hasn't been fully explored, and that, maybe some of the characters, as we've mentioned before, read a little bit too much into it. But it's definitely something there. There's definitely like more of a relationship between the two of them than there is between them and the other characters.
Well, and like what was sad about it to me is because he asked "Daijoubu desu ka?" Like he's asking, "Are you okay?" Like and they both just lost someone who's really close to them, and so they're asking each other if they're okay. And Kaname is kind of putting up a brave front when she's like, she says, "Hi," like, "Yeah, I'm okay." And then when she asks him, "Are you okay? Daijoubu desu ka?" He's all like, "Ma," like just kind of like, brushing it off. And then the looks on their faces after that just was really sad, where they're checking in to be like, "Are you okay?" And they are both clearly not okay.
Yeah, no one's okay, right? No one in this episode is okay,
It was sad.
especially Keith. Poor guy.
God, Keith has problems, but we'll get into that later.
I know. After they were checking out Freya, a couple of the guys from the Delta Squadron go to the hangar and they check out Messer's Valkyrie. And, they show where he was shot, straight into the heart. And they start talking about Messer and how he was. And later on, we find out that he had his stuff already arranged to be thrown out in case he got killed. Arad was talking about how they were just getting ready to replace him. And Hayate was really like thrown off. He just wasn't prepared for
I
it.
think he lacks the confidence and the skill he thinks is necessary to up his game in the squad now that Messer is no longer a member of Delta Squadron. He's passed away, and I think that Arid sort of hit him with the reality of that, and he's doubtful to a certain extent. And I think they all are. I think Mirage was shown as having uncertainty about what they're going to do going forward against the Aerial Knights as well, and I think that's only natural. I think Arid sort of has the plan to do that. I think he hits everybody with that reality in that way really fast in order to get everybody sort of prepared and thinking about, the next step ahead, waking them up to the fact that this is what's going on, and, you guys have to do something about it.
Well, and it's also used as a reminder to the audience, not just to Delta Squadron, that they're at war, and the reality is that they need someone to fill in Messer's place. If I remember right, Captain Ard said that Messer accounted for 30 something, like 37%
Hmm.
of their force.
Yeah.
That's pretty big when you consider out of like 5 fighters, that's one
Yeah.
person, and Hayate, because he is so emotionally attached to the situation, really doesn't want to replace Messer. But Arad reminds him that we're at war and we need someone to fill his spot in order to succeed. But he also says, to the other members of Delta Squadron, and once again reminding the audience that this is the first time that Hayate has lost someone who's been a comrade. We can guess and we can theorize based on some of the theories that are going around right now that Hayate may have lost parents, and that's one thing. But losing someone that you had just right there, that was starting to open up to you and really being more of a friend, and the way that Hayate was starting to look up to Messer and appreciate Messer, to suddenly have him removed from the picture, I think makes it difficult for him to cope with the situation at hand.
Do you guys think it's important to have a Valkyrie pilot correspond to one of the Valkyrie members? Is that part of the deal, or is that just a coincidence?
I think just to provide protection for like each of the Valkyrie members, because they are very important. So you have basically a dedicated platoon doing that. As for the rest of the stuff, I think what I was saying last was the idea that yeah, there's this idea of riding the wind, and the biofold readings and stuff like that are being watched more and more. But I'm not really sure if that was the original impetus for setting 5 Valkyrie members along with 5 members of Delta Squad. I think that's just they were just there for practical reasons. But I think over time, it's been important for certain characters, for story reasons, to be sort of paired up or put in sync with each other, particularly, obviously, Kaname and Messer, and of course, Freya and Hayate.
So in the next scene, we see Arid and Captain Johnson checking out the holographic map of the globular cluster that they're in, and they figure out a pattern that is important to the plans of the Windamirians.
They were analyzing what had happened in the battle in the previous episode, and they said that the Song of the Wind was heard over multiple planets. And then Arid asks, was this just the planets with the protoculture ruins? And Johnson confirms, no, it was heard across the entire Bersinger cluster. And when they go and put this map together, they sort of link the planets with the protoculture ruins, and it creates this sort of like design, and it shows that all the planets that experienced the Song of the Wind during the last attack were also within this pattern created by the planets with the protoculture ruins. And they figure that if Al Shahal and Vrogna are both taken, if they fall to the Windamirians, then they will have access to basically set up this interconnection between the protoculture ruins so that it covers the entire Bersinger globular cluster. And I think Johnson mentions at one point that it could put up to 8 billion inhabitants of the entire cluster at risk of being mind controlled via the Song of the Wind. So that's a pretty serious problem they got going on there. Because if that happens, that means easily the entire cluster will be theirs with minimal effort. Because at this point in the series, even though we've had a few major sort of engagements and conflicts and whatnot, the Wintermirans are pretty much rolling over the forces of the new UN Spacey and even Chaos to a certain extent. I think the Valkyrie and Delta Squadron and the people of the Elysion and whatnot have been like the only effective, like real effective counter to the Windermerians at this point. They've pretty much been taking territory and holding it, rolling over everybody without much of a fight because of the Wind Singer, the Heinz. This episode does a really good job of setting up the dramatic stakes, and they're pretty damned high at this point. And we also learn that the Windermerians are probably getting ready for like a major attack on Al Shahal and Ragna. And in anticipation of this, Johnson has asked for reinforcements from Lady M. Arid's concerned, like whether or not they'll arrive in time, and Johnson, is kind of like, well, I hope so. But yeah, so it's a pretty dire circumstance so far. Yeah,
Like, if you really think about the gravity of this, they just lost their ace pilot, and then they find out that basically Windamir has almost everything they need to achieve their end goal at this point, even though they've been putting in the efforts to stop it and thought that they were stopping it. Now everything's just looking really bleak.
And like Chad said, Delta Team has pretty much been the one team that's holding up the resistance against the Windermerians. And within Delta Team, Messer has been carrying the weight of the entire team, as we see in last episode. It just points out that the loss of Messer is even bigger than everybody thinks. I want to go back to the fact that Reina had the best 2 lines in the episode. When they were running with the tires, Freya was on the floor, and Reina just kind of like stops, and she says, "If we were stronger, we probably could have saved them." Freya just kind of like just gets up and starts running all gung ho, and then she just falls again. What was that other line that she said in this episode that was so great? I think it comes at the end when they're in the water, and figure it out by the time we get to that part. But yeah, that was like such a great line by her.
And I guess it was to show that everybody's struggling, I guess, with the death of Messer. And Reina sort of came along with a nice little bit of psychology to try and motivate her fellow Valkyrie member.
This entire episode, up until we get to the final scene with the vigil that Delta Squadron has for Messer, everything just feels really cold. Like the tone is it's really somber. But also, like, our color palettes and stuff, it's not until we have that moment where everyone's reconnecting and remembering and celebrating Messer that we get some warmer tones. But when I was watching it for the second time today, that was really the vibe that I got. It's just everything feels cold in this episode up until that point, and it creates a nice contrast. But it also, I think, adds more weight to the seriousness of the situation and really the sadness that everyone's trying to cope with.
Yeah, so the next scene is like the big scene in this episode. They're getting ready to send off Messer to the great jellyfishes of Ragna. We see the two kids, Chuck's brothers, and they created this sort of mini death dealer Valkyrie. And then they had this kind of like this touching version of
Remember 16.
yeah, that was awesome. Oh, and then the second great line by Reina is, "I don't think I could eat another jellyfish because it might be Messer," right?
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah, I mean it's meant to, pull on the heartstrings for sure, and I think it might even be a little bit too much. But I think it kind of works because I mean everything that happened last episode was pretty tragic, and it had been something that maybe some people felt that had been set up since the beginning of the series, but it definitely paid off in the long term, and it really worked. And like I said, it was one of the things that just made the dramatic tension of that last episode really great. And so I think that even though they might be indulging a little bit too much in this episode with the sadness that everybody's feeling, it was a great moment, and I think we can allow it a little bit of leeway and give them the benefit of the doubt. But overall, I pretty much enjoyed this particular sequence. I thought it was pretty good. It was kind of touching and gave an excuse for a fun song and a good callback to earlier Macross.
I think that the Vigil scene was necessary just as a closure to Messer's story.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the funeral at the beginning, but we didn't really get a lot. It was the first, I think, 30 seconds of the episode. And this was also not just the closure for the audience, but also for these characters with all the sadness and the grief that they have been experiencing. Because everyone comes together to not just send Messer's soul off, which is apparently where the shining jellyfish come into play with Rognan culture. The shining jellyfish represent the people who have died and the souls that have returned to the ocean,
Hmm.
which actually makes the jellyfish festival from the previous episodes a lot more, I think, a lot more cool when you understand that the glowing jellyfish that they're watching aren't just these random creatures that are floating out of the sea, but to them it represents people that they loved and that they cared for, whose souls are rising out of the ocean and coming to greet them. I thought that was a nice way to connect the two. I mean, they did kind of go a little bit overboard with some of the emotionality, like bringing in Messer's notes where he's correcting their flying decisions. And everyone laughs about it, like, oh, that Messer, he loved flying so much. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Yes, he clearly cared for all of you because he bothered to make corrections for you. But I don't know if I would take his corrections as a sign of endearment. But I do like this scene. I don't know if you guys noticed, but when Hack and Zach brought out the airplane, it has the bullet hole from Keith painted on the
Oh,
cockpit.
Oh,
that's
The boys
horrible.
added the hole from the cockpit.
I did not notice that actually. Yeah, that's
No.
pretty.
Yeah.
Oh, I see it. I thought it was just a picture of the sun, like a design.
No, it's the hole.
That's morbid.
I mean, they're
That's
Oh,
kids,
I kind
but
of
that's
like
still
that.
bad taste.
I kind of like that because that is so something that a young child like that would do. They would include that sort of detail.
that's funny.
But yeah, this was great because Delta Squadron got to smile together again after being so sad from this episode and towards the end of the previous one, and sending off someone that was really important to them and finding closure in that so that they can move forward in the war. I think, let's see, out of the scenes that made me cry, because this episode did make me cry, when the kids brought out the airplane, it choked me up until I saw the bullet hole, and then I started laughing. And it was a highly inappropriate place to laugh, but it was just great. And then when Walkure wades out into the water to sing Giraffe Blues
Hmm.
to Hack and Zach's plane as it's floating away, and everyone kind of comes to terms with what's happened. Walkure, understands that this is what they need to do. Kaname and Mikumo have this neat little moment where Mikumo, acknowledges Kaname and really says, "Hey, you did really good out there. I know it didn't go the way we wanted it, but you had your moment to shine."
She did.
And Kaname, playfully acknowledges her, like, yeah, Freya's not your only rival now. And then when Hayate and Mirage are talking about, they regret not telling people sooner. If they had acted sooner, things may have been different. But they can't do anything about it now. And even Hayate comes to terms with this loss also, where initially he was opposed to replacing Messer, but he couldn't really answer Arid when Arid challenged him, can you do better? Can you cover Messer? By the time the credits roll out, Hayate does pledge to cover Messer's share. So I think he's still not wanting to replace him, but he's going to try to step up in order to make up for that. I thought it was really neat. When Kaname sings to the sky, because she's singing to Messer again, that also made me cry.
Hmm.
That was so good.
Yeah. And she belts it out really, really well. There's some juxtaposition between the opening and the closing where Hayate's sitting down and he has his hand up to the sky, and then the scene closes with Kaname with her hand up in the sky.
They want to make those connections.
Yeah,
Make sure you get that imagery there. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, so the first scene with the Windamirians is where Keith is getting his plane repaired, and Bogue started making fun of Messer.
He was basically disrespecting Messer as an opponent
Yeah.
in front of everybody, and basically brown nosing, I guess, to Keith, saying their best couldn't match our best. And Keith doesn't necessarily say anything about it, but through his actions, it's clearly stated that Keith considered Messer a contemporary of sorts. And even though he defeated him, you shouldn't badmouth a warrior as great as Messer. So he really gives Bogue a dressing down, and Bogue's not really sure what he did wrong. The implication there being that there's definitely a mutual understanding between ace pilots, between Keith and Messer, even if no words are actually exchanged on the matter. So Bogue done fucked up.
He did.
Oh god, he did. And he let his rune light up again.
I know. Herman told him.
Like it's basically to the point where like Herman literally just says rune. It reminds me of a parent chastising a child, like for doing something they do over and over again. Just
Hmm.
being like, don't, and then the child stops. But we're
Yeah.
like Herman's like rune, and Bogue's like, oh no, and he's trying to hide it. I have theorized for a while that Bogue is the least mature of the group, and every time they show him in a new sequence where he can't control his emotions and shows some immaturity, then it further confirms it. You know, he may not be the youngest knight, but he's definitely the one with the least amount of maturity, especially because he wasn't able to look at Messer as someone that was like worthy of engagement. He's just looking at him like, oh, he's a filthy human. And that's why he was attempting so hard to like raise up Keith and make him look so much better. And
Hmm.
why Keith was ready to, poke him with his knife, knock him
It's
down the
probably
hole
also
in the hangar.
some jealousy as well. It probably has to do with that as well. Because I think on some level, even if it's not conscious, it's subconsciously Bogue probably realizes that Messer was like way better than he was, so he was
Hmm.
basically delighting in his downfall.
Yeah, Keith even calls him on it. He's like, could you make such a wind? And Bogue had no
Yes,
answer for it.
And Keith is never going to fly the way he did before. He's never going to have that experience again without Messer in the sky.
I think that's one of the reasons why, yeah, he Keith did reacted the way he did to Bogue, because it's like Keith is such a level of accomplished flying and combat skill that it's like it's rare for him to be able to find somebody who can match his level and give him a run for his money. So I think he's lamenting that. As much as he savored the victory, he's also lamenting it as a loss. He'll never find a challenge. It might be rare for him to find that sort of challenge again.
Roy arrives at King Gramia's bedside, and the guy Balger's there along with Keith, and he's kind of like, what are you doing here?" And King Gramia gets up, man. He's like bedridden, and then he's just all of a sudden he's like standing up, and then he puts on the wings on his head like Thor or somebody like that, and finally we get to see the finally we get to see what the Sigurd balance is, and it's just this awesome ship that they've had hidden beneath the surface of Windamir.
Well, it's a protoculture ship that the Windamirians excavated.
Yeah.
So we know Royd's been working at this for a long time, and that he's written so many papers about the protoculture
Mhm.
that I wonder if the Sigurd was part of that past research. Like in looking for evidence on Windamir, they found it. And he even said like he was kind of surprised when it did take flight, when he was talking to Belger, like, wow, I didn't know it could be reactivated. Like he initially thought that it was a defunct artifact of the planet, basically. But the Epsilon Foundation succeeded in helping Windamir get it back up off the ground. And it contains the protoculture ruins of the planet, by the way. Heinz can sing while he's on the Sigurd and activate the protoculture ruins on other planets while they're on the ship.
Yeah, they hooked him up. They set him up pretty good.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
That was such a good scene though, because it caught me by total surprise. So when it opened, that roof that they had that opened over the hangar for it.
Yeah, it's like right next to the waterfall, and the roof is like covering the waterfall, so it's like this huge. Hanger.
Yeah, and it was really when it was rising up out of the snow and the trees, like that was really cool. And the people of Windamir like saluted it almost, like they put their
Yeah, they
hand over
did.
their heart and bowed their heads. Like that was just wow. It was a really neat way to make an entrance for a new craft in this show.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love the sequence where, yeah, where it comes out of the ground, and then you see kind of like the sections of the mountains and how far down they cut into the ground just to hide that thing.
But they do have to be careful though, because Belger said that the Sigurd Valens is only at 60% analysis. So it's not at 100% complete analysis of what it can do or what it's capable of. But because it's at 60%, he gives the okay for them to start using it. And that's when Gromia, reveals to Royd, like, you're not really 100% in this plan. And it's really creepy how frequently he's mentioning his rune and how it's sensing everything. So he accuses Royd of being uncertain with the plan and not really committing to it 100% because he is so worried about Heinz's well-being and honestly worried about killing the kid. I mean, he's really young and their lifespan is short enough anyways, and he has weak health. And Gromia says he could sense it with his runes
Yeah.
because Royd's runes weren't like admitting these feelings that he should be having about full commitment to the project. And then he says, Heinz experienced visions in that dimensional space or something to that effect. And Royd looks shocked, like, what do you mean? How do you know? And Grami is like, I sensed it with my rune. And every time he said that he sensed something with his rune, it was starting to feel like the runes are becoming a little too much of a plot moving device in this scene.
Mhm.
Like, how do you know this? My rune. But why? My rune felt it. And it started to get a little repetitive. But you know shit's going down when King Gromia gets out of bed and gets dressed.
Yeah, he's just like, it's time for me to get up. He's been in bed for like years or something like that, but obviously the guy could walk.
Oh, I have another thought. I'd initially thought that it would be Keith that would really be the force that kind of ruins the plan because he was so intent on acting on his own and not following Royd's directions. But now that they pointed out that Royd is the one with the uncertainties and they're deviating away from how he wanted to do things initially, and Keith even said, "You're moving too slow. We don't have time for this." So we have to do it this way. That I wonder if Royd is actually going to be that driving force that kind of not necessarily actively ruins Windermere's plan, but it ends up undermining its intentions because it's not going the way he wants and he does feel those doubts. It's not just the number of times that Walker has interfered, but
Huh.
also because they've actually made contact with Heinz through the protoculture ruins in that dimensional
That's
space.
true.
And because
Yeah.
they were strong enough to make contact with the Windsinger, who's supposedly supposed to be stronger than most who emit biological fold waves, that's something that would be very concerning to the king and the movement of the plans that he would like to have set in motion and completed. And he and Keith are very aggressive in this, and they're wanting to take back the pride of their planet. And that's something I hear from them a lot. We lost our pride. This was the day they fired that dimensional weapon. That's Windamir's shame. Whereas you don't really hear that from Royd. Royd is protoculture this, protoculture that. He even says Heinz could be the great leader of the protoculture, that he has the potential for that, which I thought was interesting because as far as we know, the original protoculture don't actually exist anymore. Now it's just their I guess quote unquote offspring races. So Royd sees the potential for Heinz to achieve great things, but Keith and King Gramia the Fourth are really busy thinking about their planet and the globular cluster that they want to control, regardless of what happens to Heinz. Like there's even a point where Keith even says to Royd, "Why do you care what happens to him?" What a jerk.
Really getting the short end of the stick lately. This episode and the episode before when he challenges Keith and loses, and then he's second guessed it on all of his decisions and whatnot, and his authority has been continually undermined, I guess, in these last few episodes. And now we have the king here, His Majesty, taking personal command of the forces as they're going to launch a major big ass strike against Al Shahal and Ragna because they want those planets and their protoculture ruins bad to complete their plans.
And that's the end of the episode. Good night, everybody.
The end. Well, let's move on to the messages then. Let's pull it up.
All right. So Irving Miranda at Irving Miranda 2 says, just saw Macross Delta episode 11. Oh, the feels. Messer deserves a missing man formation flyover. That would have been super dramatic.
Yeah, that would have been cool. Why didn't they do that?
Probably because we had the vigil at the end.
Yeah, plus they had to have the pallets on the ground and all that stuff. Can't have them flying and then look at how sad they are.
Yeah. No, I think we had to have a trade. We either would get our missing man formation or we get our happy vigil where everyone's drinking
Yeah.
banana sake and setting Messer's plane free into the ocean.
Somebody needs to do a fan art of that. That's what we need.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that was yeah, artists, get on that. Let's see the missing man formation for Messer's funeral.
What's the next one?
All right, the next tweet is from @BrassPV. Cannot wait to get the Blu-rays so me and the kids can watch. Well, one of them watches with me already. That's really neat that one of your kids can watch this show with you. That's an awesome way, I think, to introduce new fans into the series.
Did you see I replied to that one?
Let's just indoctrinate our kids. No, I didn't see your reply to that one.
I put adopt me, and then he replied, not sometime this century.
Aw, poor
Oh,
Alex.
rejected. Still orphaned. Still orphan EXO.
All right. The last one from Twitter is from Sir Salisbury at Togakun. He said,
Who?
Sir Salisbury, our friend
Uh,
Sean
I see.
at Togakun, says one interesting thing. Does Hayate's proclamation about covering for the loss of Messer mean he's been holding back? Now that I've seen the subs, because at the time that he asked, I hadn't seen it. I
Mhm.
don't think it means that he's been holding back. I think what we've been seeing is Hayate's skill as a pilot,
Mhm.
and he's still a newbie pilot, all things considered, because he hasn't been flying as long as everyone else. But I think it says more about Hayate's determination to do his part for Delta Squadron and then some.
Yeah, I mean, it's established from the beginning that he was a slacker, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't really taking it all serious. And then we get this, like Chad says, it's a dark turn in the story. And he really has to like confront the serious part of him that tells him, hey, you're in a war. You have to like step up. And somebody got killed. Somebody close to you got killed.
I don't know. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was actually Messer who initially doubted Captain Arid inviting Hayate in for his quote unquote audition
Yeah,
back in episode 2. It was Messer who
yeah.
was like, "Are you sure he's not taking any of this seriously?"
Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah. So this is from Guy XXED on YouTube. And he says, Hey, just wanted to throw in that you guys are doing a really great job with this podcast. Your conversations all have a nice balance to them, with all three of you having good, significant input and no one voice dominating the talk. You have good chemistry with each other and are a lot of fun to listen to. It would be nice to have an audio download of this somewhere so that I could listen on my drive to work, but that's the only real quibble I have. Thank you very much for putting the time and effort into making these. That's really nice. Thank you. We appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Do we reply to him as far as downloading the episode, or is that something that we have set up?
So for downloading the episode, I just have to turn the switch on in SoundCloud, which I'm going to do as soon as we're done recording. Um, so that way it'll be a download option on SoundCloud. Guy XSED, I don't know if you're listening. We also do have a SoundCloud account that's audio only and might be a little bit more accessible at work. And that address is soundcloud.com/Macross Delta Recap Show.
And we'll put the link on the bottom of the video so you guys can find it.
Yeah.
And Mariano Filipowicz, the only character that made Macross Delta interesting, I guess he's talking about Messer. They definitely focused on his character the last few episodes, but I don't think that he's the only one that was interesting. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I would not agree with that at all. I think we talked earlier a little bit about the Messer character and how the Messer character was basically not that well developed, and I defended it as a story choice, which actually just going through this episode, we're actually confirmed with a theory that I had that Messer was actually holding back socially on the rest of the group because he didn't want to get too close to anybody in case he harmed someone else, or in case the others needed to put him down in case of his VAR syndrome getting out of control. So as a result, Messer was a very distant character and just not very interesting. He had to be played as kind of dour and unemotional and unengaged and just not very alive, especially in comparison to the other characters, which I think a lot of the other characters, not the flat ones, but obviously the ones that are being developed properly for the series, they've all been very vibrant and just filled with personality, and not only just personality for the sake of having characters with some personality, but also because they're sort of complementary to the story of that Macross Delta is telling, right? And that's great. It gets you invested in them, and yeah, just gets you on board with them. I know, yeah, that's pretty much how I feel about it. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think that the Messer character is like one of the most has been one of the most interesting characters of the series so far?
I don't know if I would say that Messer's the most interesting part, but I think the emotionality surrounding Messer's situation made it very interesting. Because if you think about it, they made us care about Messer in like what, 40 minutes? Two 20-minute episodes?
Yeah, pretty
Whereas
much.
before he was the really grumpy training officer and nobody really liked him because he was grouchy and he didn't want to hang out with anybody.
Hmm.
And the more that I thought about it, the stuff that I do like about Messer is the stuff that I've theorized about him and hasn't actually been confirmed. Like I like the idea of Messer being hypercritical of himself and choosing to avoid people because he knows that he's vulnerable to the VAR and that he can be a danger to them and that kind of thing. And they do say that at his vigil, where Arad's like, well, he couldn't get too close to you guys because then you wouldn't be able to kill him if he turned full VAR. And that's great, but that's all we see of that. So I don't know if he's the interesting part, but the emotionality around his situation and his death definitely made this a really engaging part of Macross Delta.
I'd have to disagree on that for sure. I mean, that's fine if some viewers are actually bringing in their own, imaginations and interpretations to, a character. But to me, that just says, okay, well, this character isn't well defined enough. So people are having to bring in their own interpretations. If you're just talking about like what's on the page and what's actually in the series, no, there's not enough there for that character to be considered interesting. Maybe
Yeah.
after the fact, we get like the full skinny on him, right? And we have that sort of added layer of the fact that yes, because his character had these circumstances set up, which we didn't really know until his character arc was pretty much already over, then his sort of tale gets told in a way that is interesting. But just as it is, he's written on the page. No, there's nothing there. There's you would have to bring in your own sort of interpretation and sort of add that to that, and that's fine if that's what you like to do with individual stories. But just on its face, no, he was definitely not the most interesting character.
We also have to remember that Konami was not even in the scenes. I mean, she was in the scenes, but she had no personality before these episodes. Also, she was basically missing.
So this one's from Felipe on what looks like Facebook, who has a theory on who Lady M is. So Felipe thinks that Lady M is Miria, and his theory goes like this. He says, story-wise, I think she'll end up having a talk with Mirage, and Hayate will come up. Afterwards, she may end up sparring with Hayate and end up kissing or revealing her feelings with a nudge from Milia. Seems very Macrossy. Also, I think Hayate resonates with Freya due to the crystal in his necklace. The gem probably comes from Windamirian ruins. Which is interesting because I always thought it was fold quartz. I didn't think it might come from ruins.
I don't know. Maybe they exported some crystals, but I don't think we have anything that says that.
Well, there are crystals around the Shrine of Time,
Hmm.
but I thought they were fold quartz.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Um,
It could be protoculture related too. We do know that Hayate is very well traveled and he's been around. We
Mm-hmm.
get early in the series they do sort of like a I think it's Arad that does like a breakdown of his his past jobs and his past where he's lived before and where he's been and where his passport to show that he's been and stuff, and he's been like all around, so he could have picked up something like that from protoculture ruins. So it could be a protoculture sort of device, but I don't think anything says one way or the other, but I suppose it's as good a guess as any.
this one's from Father Payne 12. I would think the reason that Keith could sense Messer is because of the VAR. The Windamirs seem to be sensitive to fold waves and fold bacteria that is causing the VAR could give off a unique fold signature that Keith gets to know that belongs to Messer through their engagements.
Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense. That's probably a little bit more logically based than the fact that they're boyfriends, which is what I've been joking about the past couple
I'm
episodes.
gonna bet on the boyfriends thing.
Just more Fujoshi fodder for everyone making stuff for Comiket coming up this summer.
And why not? As it should be. But yeah, I don't know if there's that's another aspect I think of the fiction of Macross Delta that has been like largely undefined, and I was kind of complaining about it in earlier episodes, and now I think I'm just relegated to the fact that they're simply not going to explain it. You just have to kind of go with it. It's just there, and there is no real explanation or any rules regarding it. It's just going to be there because it's, I guess, dramatically more potent or something like that, to have them have this special connection or this sensing of each other, or,
Well, we know Walkure is, they have to have that
The fold receptors.
receptors. Yeah, old
receptors.
recept.
Do you think that to become an aerial knight, that's like the same kind of requirement that they would have?
Well, their runes are fold receptors, so
Oh, that's true.
Yes,
Windamirians
yeah.
are built with them.
I guess what we're trying to link would be the connection between Messer and Keith.
But clearly, though, the
So,
runes are very sensitive. If you think about what King Gromio was saying to Royd when they were in his bedchamber,
mhm,
and he's saying, I can feel your uncertainty through my runes because your runes are not reacting the way they're supposed to. But even then, he
mhm,
could sense Heinz's encounter with Walkure through his rune. So these
yeah,
are a lot more sensitive than we initially thought they were, I think, and probably more powerful than we initially thought. And that might be how Keith is keying in, since they seem to be using the runes to key into other things in their environment anyways, is
mhm.
he's using his rune to pick Messer out from the crowd. The var
Yes, like
bacteria just kind of gives him like a flashing arrow over his head.
yeah. So he's like in tune with Messer. So
Hmm.
there's a good possibility, I guess. Good theory. Yeah. So that's it for this week. Next episode is episode 12, King of the Wind with Sassy. Look at
Very,
that.
very
She's
grouchy
excited.
cat.
She's excited. She's like, yes, finally, the big battle.
We're just gonna
Finally.
have her do the whole episode.
We
That'd be
should.
awesome. I'd listen to that.
Just her
Subscribe,
reactions,
like,
you know.
Oh
and
God. You don't want this cat for like 40 minutes straight.
all right, let's close it out. We're done. Celia, where can we find you when you're not on the Macross Delta recap show?
You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Celia Rose Cosplay. And you can find me on Twitter at Planets Twinkle.
And Chad?
Yeah, you can contact me at marchingcw@hotmail.com. You can, of course, visit my website, the Macross Mecha Manual, and you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Macross Mecha Manual. And lastly, I post on various anime message boards such as Anime Nation, ANN, and of course Macross World.
And this is EXO. You can reach me at the Macross World Facebook page or the Macross Delta Facebook page, or you could tweet at me at Macross Tweet, the official Macross World Twitter account. Thanks. Adios. That's it.